Most of us are unfortunately familiar with grief, but what if the losses that hurt the most are the ones that nobody can see?
Invisible loss is when we experience an event, an moment of impact that makes us feel unacknowledged, unseen, rejected, abandoned. And we shift our perception of self so completely that we are afraid to go and risk, to take opportunities, we actually start to see opportunities as threats. And we step into that place in between that moment of impact and the life we would have had or we could have, and we protect ourselves.
Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Robert Duff. This is the Hardcore Self-Help Podcast, and today I have a very special guest, Christina Rasmussen. Christina is a grief educator, an author, and the creator of the Life Reentry Process. She combines her personal experience with grief along with her expertise to provide a unique path for healing.
I think people were shocked because I was so young doing all of this. For me, I think it was incredible and amazing, and I was just very grateful for my healthy life until everything changed.
In this episode, Christina gets vulnerable about her own personal experience with grief and how that motivated her to help thousands of people navigate their own losses.
Felt like an alien living on planet Earth, because that moment changed me so much that all of my friends, you have friends with the same age kids, with the same lives, and then all of a sudden you change dramatically.
Most importantly, you'll hear about Christina's revolutionary idea of invisible loss and how that can help you identify your own hidden griefs. We dive deep into the moments that define us, the promises we make to ourselves in our darkest hours, and how to find strength in the aftermath of loss. So stay tuned to hear Christina's insights about reclaiming loss. And if you've ever experienced invisible loss, that feeling that you've lost a part of yourself but can't quite put your finger on, I want you to stick around because you'll learn something and get some very actionable tips from this episode. So make sure you're subscribed. If you have a question for the show, shoot me an email to duffthepsych@gmail.com. Links for everything are in the description. Let's get into it. Okay, everybody, we have an awesome guest today. We have Christina Rasmussen on the show. Christina is a grief educator, a best-selling author, and the creator of the Life Reentry Process. Her work includes Second First, Where Did You Go?, and the upcoming Invisible Loss. And her unique insights stem from profound personal experience with loss, which she's channeled into creating a new path for healing and reclaiming life. So Christina, welcome to the show.
So good to be here, Robert. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation and also learning from you, because I think you have been in this kind of work for so long, and talking to someone who is in the same field is very different to someone who isn't. So I look forward to this conversation very much.
No pressure for me. Okay, so I have to teach you something now. No, that's great. We were already chatting, before the camera started rolling, so to speak. So I'm excited to continue that. So if you don't mind, as a start, I understand that a lot of your work comes from your own experiences with loss and such. If you don't mind, I would like to start prior to that, because I don't know a whole lot about Christina before the story that led to the books.
Yeah.
Where'd you grow up? What was your life like prior to these experiences that shaped you?
I grew up in Greece, a small place. Actually, it's not that small. It has around 200,000 people, like a kind of a semi-city, I guess. Place called Volos, on the water. And I grew up with a good mom and dad. I mean, there's always things as we grow up, as we look back. But I grew up in the neighborhood playing with the other kids. School was tough. I was never like the best student. I was always a B student, never an A, sometimes C. I didn't want to study. And my teachers would say, and there's a reason why I'm mentioning this, because our conversation will go down some of these paths, but the teachers would tell my parents, if only she opened her books, if only she studied, she's getting B's with no studying whatsoever. And one day she will. And I guess I did, but I left Greece, when I was 18 years old. And Robert, I was the only kid to leave my hometown. All of my friends stayed put, and I left to go to study in the UK. in England.
Is that how it is there? People typically don't leave?
Now it's a little different, but 20 years ago, um, I mean, I didn't know anyone who had gone. I did not know, I didn't know anything. I think my aunt, my dad's sister had gone to the UK because we had great aunts living there. And my dad thought I should go and stay with them for a little bit. And it was catastrophic for me. I went to a foreign country. I'd never gone anywhere. I'd never been on a plane. And I went there thinking I was going to stay for a year. But I guess I stayed for 10 and did my bachelor's and master's in counseling at Durham University, and here's where destiny comes in. Prior to any of my tragedies or losses, traditional losses, I should say, my thesis, I decided to specialize in grief, and I did my thesis on the stages of bereavement, not knowing, and people ask me this, how did you know? What was that about? I said, I don't know. I just knew that I loved people so much that I couldn't imagine losing them. And I wanted to help others who would go through something so devastating. And of course, I didn't know then what would happen after. And and so my story began on this path before. And of course, I'm looking out up in the sky, out my window, as I'm talking to you, Robert, and I'm saying to myself, and I'm in a very reflective place, 3 books later, a lot of years of doing the work, teaching, speaking, writing, lots of writing, helping so many people. I look back at that young 20-something-year-old human being in England wanting to know this. And I bet, and someone said to me yesterday in another conversation, do you think that was your higher self? Like preparing you? I said, maybe it was my higher self saying, hey, you better study this. You're going to need anything you can get. So.
Sure. I hear stories like that sometimes, like people getting to say Alzheimer's research before a parent acquires Alzheimer's or something like that. Yeah.
So that's how it started. And then after that, we moved to Houston, Texas from England. And I worked, I volunteered I wasn't allowed to have a normal job. So because of our visa at the time. So I went and volunteered my skills and my education. And I used to facilitate, support groups, grief support groups at a hospice.
Wow.
And I used to go and sit with the dying. Again, all this before my experience. So their family members could go and shower and I would sit and give them water. And I think people were shocked because I was so young doing all of this. For me, I think it was incredible and amazing. And I was just very grateful for my healthy life until everything changed. Yeah.
Why mental health in the first place? So, you could have studied anything. Mm-hmm. You were in the UK. Was mental health always the direction that you probably would have gone?
See, that's a really good question. So ever since I was born, I wanted to be an artist. And
you do make great art.
Have you? Thank you so much. It means you had a look at it. Nobody says that. Nobody has looked at it. Thank you.
We'll talk more about that. Yeah, I'm very interested in your art, but so that's always been a part of you.
It means a lot to me. Yes. So at 5 years old, my mom took me to the neighbor's house in Greece. He was a hairdresser by day and an incredible artist by night. He had these art shows and I was telling my parents ever since I could speak, I want to be an artist. And she took me to his studio and I will never forget it. I walked in there. I didn't say a word, but I took everything in and I remember this and I wanted to be an artist ever since then. But at the time, my parents, and as the years went by, of course, didn't think that I could make a living from this like most parents do or did, hopefully not anymore. And, so I chose, when I went to the UK to study, Robert, my parents just said, go make something of yourself, leave the majority, go into the minority. And my dad would say, spread your wings and be very different to anyone else. And at the time, I didn't really care about that. Or I didn't want to say goodbye to my friends. You're 18 years old, you don't. And I talk about this in the book. I survived my life trying to prove my intelligence and my worth through academia and going into Durham University, which is, it's Oxford, Cambridge, Durham in England. Like, I couldn't, when that happened to me, imagine the kid that never studied, never got any grades, Robert. I got in there. I was like, what?
You slipped through the cracks.
So when that happened, I guess I was influenced by the collective voice of like, this is worth more than art. This is worth more value than you saying yes to art. So I never pursued it then. And I had a couple other times in the future to pursue, and I didn't. And I had to forgive myself in the last few years for that. And we'll talk about that more, but that's
different sort of grief.
Different kind of grief, but that's the mental health. My first degree was in education, so I have a bachelor's in education, and I knew I didn't want to be a teacher in elementary school or middle school. I knew I didn't want that, and I knew that psychology was much more interesting to me. And then I went right straight into the master's program and studied and did the thesis and then moved to Houston and volunteered my services and I learned a lot. But when it happened to me, when I did lose my first husband, Robert, I couldn't believe how different it was to what I imagined.
Can you talk a little bit about that? So I have avoided listening to the story about what happened to you just because I want to hear it from you. If you don't mind, share a little bit about what happened and how that was different from what the books told you and what you expected.
It's so much worse than I imagined or people imagine. And we were so young. He was the better half. He was the genius, literally a genius. I mean, he was a genius, and it didn't make any sense that he was the I was like, what? Why him? I mean, how? I know it sounds funny to what I'm going to say next, but one of my first thoughts was, who's going to teach the kids math? I'm terrible at math. Who's going to sit with them when they're doing homework? And when he was diagnosed, the girls were 9 months old and 2.5 years old.
Wow.
How old are your kids, Robert?
6 and 8.
So, and they were 4.
So I can imagine.
Yes, and they were 4 and 6 when he passed.
Wow.
And the hardest day of my life was when I left the hospital after he passed and had to go home and tell my children. And I said to myself, if I survive this, I will be indestructible. Like, there's nothing that could shake me. And we'll talk about that too. But anyway, it was horrible. I couldn't sleep for a really long time. I did not cry for about 4 months. I think my body was trying to keep me alive. I don't know what it was. And, I loved him so much. We would be the couple that would hold hands. And we were both Europeans living in the US with no family around. He was from Denmark. I was from Greece. We were all alone. So we were each other's best friends. And, it was just, catastrophic. I felt like an alien living on planet Earth, because that moment changed me so much that all of my friends, you have friends with the same age kids, with the same lives, and then all of a sudden you change dramatically. You're not the same person as they are. I remember I was standing at a soccer game with the other moms, and they were all complaining how their husbands had gone on a business trip and left them home with the construction worker for their $5 million house, right? And I sat there and I closed my eyes and I said to myself, keep it together. Don't say anything, because my husband didn't just go away for a week. And they were they were not aware of what they were saying in front of me, right? The world hurts you, but they don't do it deliberately. This is not them being mean. They just couldn't imagine or couldn't comprehend that this was not landing with me, and I couldn't commiserate, couldn't share. So, I remember we lived in an affluent town, and I stood out because all of a sudden I was the one that lost this young guy to cancer, and people approached me in the cemetery sometimes. Oh, I heard about you and your story. So it was always very alienating, and I was angry and mad at him. It wasn't his fault for leaving us. And, Robert, it was a defining moment where I said, if I ever make it back to feeling alive again, I'm going to go back and get everyone else. And that was the promise to myself, meaning go and get everyone also who's suffering and get them back over the bridge to life.
Do you remember when you made that promise to yourself? Like, is there a distinct moment there?
Yeah, it was early on, and I was struggling very much. I was working in the corporate world. I also have a postgraduate degree in human resource management, because when he was dying, while he was dying, and we were going to all these chemotherapy sessions, and we were raising the very, very small kids. You know how busy that is. I also went back to school to prepare myself to have a job at a corporate place where I could get health insurance, because we knew he was going to die. And maybe being in mental health doing grief therapy for others while I was grieving, this wasn't I couldn't do that, Robert. I could not do that. Like I hated grief at that. I mean, I was like, I can't even help myself. How am I going to help anyone else? And so I said to myself, okay, I need to help other humans in a different way. So I went to Northeastern University in Boston and studied human resource management. And it took me a couple of years part-time to do that postgraduate work. And after he passed, I applied immediately to work in the corporate world. And working there in that cold environment with no feelings, no compassion to anyone's struggles whatsoever, that's when I made that promise. I'm like, there's millions of people like me that are completely invisible. People knew that I had just lost my husband. They knew that in the interview process. They knew that I had I was a single mom. I had no babysitters. They knew, but nobody would say anything or mention it. And I had to prove myself in the work the same as everyone else. And I had to start from ground zero, by the way. Like, I had to start from first, like, associate position, like entry level position. And I had someone who managed me was like 25 years old. And Robert, let me tell you this. I said to myself, what else can go wrong right now? Like, seriously.
Look at me right now. This guy's 10 years younger than my husband that just died. Yes.
Like what? What? I was like looking for answers, like, whoever is up there, whatever, this is unfair. This is just wrong. Right. But then in every thought like that, for some reason, it's not because I'm the nicest, kindest person in the world. I'm not. But immediately, even now, whenever I'm having a hard day, the immediate thought next to that thought for me is that gosh, all the other people in the world who are going through this are feeling the same. That was the thought that followed my own thing. And actually, I've never expressed it this way before, because I'm in this reflection place. I'm like, and I have noticed that whenever I'm learning something new, whenever I am experiencing, maybe you're feeling the same way. You are helping so many people as well. I'm like, gosh, this is what everyone else is experiencing. And I have compassion. I have so much compassion. And that's how it started. And if it wasn't for catastrophic days where I would get into that elevator going upstairs to the 10th floor in a building that looked like a prison, maybe I wouldn't have done this. And I knew then I could have chosen art, and I chose survival. And now I understand why, and no regrets. But if I was to go back and change anything, I would change that. But this chapter wouldn't have happened. None of this would have happened.
I think you would have found your way to something important any variety of ways. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm curious. early on in the process, did you feel betrayed by like the bereavement field and the grief field, right? Having all this knowledge coming into it and then being smacked with this experience and it not fitting. Like, did you feel a sense of betrayal there?
Oh my God, what a good question. I felt like, what have they been doing all these hundreds of years in the psychology field? And I know the way you do your work and the little that I've researched in the last few days to get to know you, to get to know who I was going to talk to. I get to meet all these new people. It's so exciting. I'm like, it's like going for a coffee, right? And not knowing who you're going to meet.
Cheers.
Cheers to that. And so like the way you want to give the content and the knowledge is like, it's the right way. And I think that industry failed us and it failed me. And God, Robert, the only way I can describe I was so furious. I was angry. I was mad. I was bitter. I was like, get out of here. How come nobody said this? Like, I didn't see it. And at the time when my first book came out, Second First, when I wrote that later, there was nothing like it out there. I remember when that proposal went into the publisher and they were immediately, when I was so nervous. I was like, oh my God, this is my second language. I'm going to get a book. I'm going to write a book. I was like, I'm going to say everything wrong. Like, I don't deserve this. I had all these thoughts. And I remember them saying to me, you have no idea how well you described this, and using neuroscience and the brain. And because I knew that everything else that I was out there, and I know I'm very like black and white, but it wasn't making me feel any better. I wasn't understanding what was happening. And I knew it wasn't, yes, my heart was broken, but my brain was broken too, Robert. It was like, it was in such survival mode. I hated everything in my life. I didn't like my friends anymore. And nobody was saying anything about all those things that I was experiencing. And the last thing I want to say, the pain. Every day I would wake up and it felt like a whole decade, one day. And I had this friend who would say this to me, and I catch myself anytime I say the same sentence. Christina, she would say. And she didn't know any better. Just take one day at a time. How many people say this? I wanted to scream and say, do you know what one day feels like for me?
Right.
But I even nearly said this sometimes to some people, and I stopped myself immediately because that's kind of our default setting. That's the way we're being trained. But one day during those early years was like a century, and I was always a very happy and positive person, and this I was like, I was never going to feel happy again. And I think you can see with my personality, I'm like this all the time. This is who I am. When I first decided to study grief, my professor said, you're so happy. Why are you going in such a traumatic field? I'm like, and that's when I said, I want to know how people get over something so difficult. So yeah.
Yeah. That's really interesting. So, I mean, it's, your work comes from a very genuine place, born out of, desire to help the people who haven't been helped, but also frustration at what wasn't there when you were going through it.
It was not there.
Yeah. Is that what led to your approach to the life reentry sort of approach?
Yes. And I think for me, when I started doing this work, so I had the master's in counseling, and then I went and did a year-long neuroscience program where I learned a lot of things there. And I started using, so this is 2010, and I started using some tools from that program and some tools from my traditional education. And I wasn't getting I was not getting the results I wanted. And I started seeing that anytime someone would leap, and at the time I wasn't using the words waiting room, and I wasn't using the process, the definition, the terminology I created, the next session, they would look traumatized when they would come back to their safety place. And I said to myself, this is not right. I started listening and listening and listening to my sessions. And I started seeing very common themes and behaviors. And of course, I had started writing my blog, and I would get all these thousands of emails from people telling me the same things from different cultures, different parts of the world, the same language that we're using, the same feelings. And that's how I started seeing seeing the work. And I actually remember the day I sat, and I knew that day it was a special day. And I remember sitting and I just wrote down the steps, and I sat back and I said, okay, there's something here. And I want to add something. I can't share more than this, what I'm going to share now, but the last 5 years, my work has gone through traditional clinical trials, Robert. 2 trials.
How does that feel? That's a whole different type of scrutiny.
I had this incredible group of scientists that approached me. There was a person who came to my classes over the years, and I don't know who was in my classes, and there were hundreds of people there, again, from everywhere. And she worked at a lab, and she went to the scientists and said, there's something here you might want to look at. And then one day I met with, we had a Zoom call like this with all the scientists, all the scientists. And they said they wanted to try and go for funding to see if they could do it. And they got 2 out of 2.
Awesome.
And
that's not always easy to acquire that sort of funding.
They told me at the time, we have less than 10% chance of getting that.
Wow.
Getting any. And we got 2 out of 2, Robert.
If only the little B and C student version of you could see you with this panel of scientists.
It did.
Funding.
I was scared to death. And then I spent the next 5 years I was the drug, and there was the placebo group, right? And this is real. And the results will come out in scientific papers and stuff. And I can't say any more than that, but I can say that they happened. And it was shocking to me that I sat down that day all these years ago, and I put the steps down. And then my first class was around 210, 211. And a week before the class had started, I had 0 participants. 0.
Yeah.
And then the day the class started, there were 22 people. And I remember doing the work with that group versus just with clients, and it just exploded. It was incredible to see it in a group setting. And I knew then, and of course, I would say, join the Life Reentry class. And people would say, what is Life Reentry? What is it? And then I would talk about the waiting room and how we're stuck in between 2 lives, the life we leave behind, the life we could have, but we think this is living, and we die in that place in between. And I would have all these people write to me, Robert, and say, I'm in the waiting room. Oh my God. Even just knowing that without doing anything else, anyway. So that's how it all started. And still to this day, it's 20 years since his cancer diagnosis. 21. No, actually, so he was diagnosed 2003. And we are 2024, so 21 years later since my life changed on that diagnosis day completely. And today, actually, I know this is going to be released at a different day. Today, the book came out. It's today.
In the Invisible Loss book?
Yes, it just came out.
Oh, okay.
It just released today. And when I saw the dates, there was this day and another day, I said, you know what? I'm going to meet with Robert today. It's a special day.
Well, congratulations. That's great.
and it's crazy out in social media and all these things. And I said, no, my conversation with Robert is going to keep me grounded. I want to channel this into a great conversation. And maybe that's why you seem a little more excited today. It's a big day. And for me, it's ending a really big chapter. So I wrote in my blog today, I'm putting down my swords, my backpacks, my tools, everything that I had taken with me all these years to help myself and so many others. And I don't know what happens next, but I know something is changing in my life going forward, because I hope this book is going to take over my job. I hope this book is going to do what I've been doing. And so today's an important day, and I'm very grateful to spend it with you.
Yeah, glad to celebrate together. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I'm not, super familiar with each book, except for the top level. But the impression I've gotten is that you've kind of started from a smaller, like micro perspective, and it's kind of broadening outward. Would you say that's true?
Yes, very well said. Actually, this is the best anyone has ever said it. So I started with people who had gone through tragic losses, and that was my interest. Has always been my interest. This anyone else at the time, the way I saw this, anyone else could not possibly imagine the tragedy that we go through, the kind of loss that we go through. So when I made the discovery of invisible loss, I was not looking for it. I was not expecting it. I actually denied it. I was like, what? I started seeing people exit that stagnation place, that stuckness in their life, and go out and live a good life for a while. And then something would pull them back. And I remember thinking to myself, what is that? And when you work with so many people, you see patterns, and I kept seeing it. And I said to myself, dare I say it's not the tragedy that's pulling them back here? Because the shadow of the tragedy in our lives is so large that it hides any other maneuver that's going on within our brain or within our heart, anything else. And I started seeing this pattern of people being pulled back to that waiting room because they were using survival skills that they had coped with prior to that loss, with other losses that were not secondary losses. People always say to me, Christina invented secondary loss. No, do not say secondary. It's invisible. And there's a very big difference in that. Beyond divorce, job loss, pet loss, like all these other things that we already talk about as grief. It was something else that had no language and no words, and I couldn't see it at first. And
can you define it a bit? So what is invisible loss? The way that you talk about it.
Invisible loss is when we experience an event, a moment of impact that makes us feel unacknowledged, unseen, rejected, abandoned. And we shift our perception of self so completely that we are afraid to go and risk, to take opportunities, we actually start to see opportunities as threats. And we step into that place in between that moment of impact and the life we would have had or we could have, and we protect ourselves and our future lives so we never experience that kind of loss again. It's a shift in, we go from that higher level thinking to a primal basic level of survival. We go from understanding who we are and the greatness of who we are to shifting into doubting ourselves and very low self-worth. And as I was doing this work and writing the book and going through all the data and all the things, I realized the invisible loss is the loss from that original self. We are no longer connected with who we are. And that survivor persona that is actually dictating and making decisions for us is choosing the wrong life. So even if your life is looking good from the outside, you feel like you're doing right by your parents, by your spouse, your kids. If you're making decisions based from that shift in perception of self, you're actually living a slightly wrong life that is it's
inauthentic.
It is very inauthentic. It will make you feel when you wake up in the morning burdened, and the amount of people who would tell me how the heaviness in them. I mean, how many people feel like they don't want to go to work in the morning. They don't want to wake up on a Tuesday morning and have their day. And we believe that that's normal. We really think that when I realized it doesn't have to be so hard, it was a big change in my own life. It doesn't have to be so hard, Robert. It doesn't have to be so hard. And the reason why it's so hard is because our choices are based on how we can look worthy to others, how we can please others, how we can play the part. There's a filter that exists. And I know I'm sure you've seen this in your own work.
Sure.
So yeah.
Yeah. What kind of examples maybe do you include in your book, or things that you have seen amongst people that you've worked with or in your life of invisible loss playing out? What are the kind of things that cause that shift for somebody to start going into that survival mode versus living that version of their authentic self?
So I have 2 or 3 examples I use all the time. And normally in a conversation like this, I immediately start telling you about these examples. And then all of a sudden, Robert, this question came to me and said, I need to ask Robert what comes to his mind about his own life when I am sharing this. And I hope this is not too personal, but it just stopped me from sharing the examples.
So what events in my life have caused me to make a shift toward acting based on survival rather than my actual authentic desires? The only thing that comes to mind is financial stuff, honestly, of acting out of a need for security, coming from, very humble beginnings and stuff like that, making choices that are primarily financially driven versus passion driven or something of that sort. That's kind of what comes to mind for me. On the same hand, I think I've also been very lucky to be able to be very authentic in my work, in my life. I have been lucky to be able to follow a line that is very much me still. So I think I've actually gotten very lucky in that regard too.
And it's amazing how the financial aspect is quite often where we find that we're choosing to not necessarily survive, but the okay choice versus the perfect choice for us. It's a very different. It's a difference. When that happens, it doesn't come from that current place in your life. It comes from an earlier place where you may have felt rejected for who you were. There was a moment in time where maybe, and I see that's one invisible loss or moment of impact that I see quite often, a lot actually. I saw that a lot, more than you would think, in classroom settings, in meetings, business meetings, where someone says something in public about you that you feel ashamed, that you feel embarrassed, that you feel like you don't have the answer. And that's catastrophic. Actually, that's a very catastrophic feeling for someone. And it gets triggered not only from that event, but because there were prior events that were similar to that have taken place. So our perception of worth and perception of our abilities has kind of gone down. So when we are sitting at home about to make a choice between safety or risk, that survivor voice will come and say, you may not have what it takes to risk this, and you are going to fail. And that's how it shows up.
Is your decision to pursue art at this stage of your life related to you picking up on the invisible loss in your own life?
So I knew that at some point in my life I was going to do that, but I was thinking, when I stop writing one day, when I stop doing this, because I couldn't possibly leave everyone behind to choose this for myself. How dare I? I've created all this, it's not necessarily success, but all this great work, and I'm going to leave it? I'm going to abandon it? What? How ungrateful. And I would ask for forgiveness from the universe. Like I struggled with that concept. So one of the core elements of the work is that our first exit from the waiting room cannot be risky. It cannot trigger your fear center, your amygdala. It should not get your survivor mindset up and running. And it's almost like we're going to have to sneak out. So the only way to change your life, as far as I'm concerned, and my experience with the work in the last few years, is 5% risk or less. And it has to be rewarding. So when you're making these choices in your life, the financial choices as well, your fear center will say, if you choose this, you're going to end up broke and not homeless per se, but it's catastrophizing your future.
You're going to screw up your kids,
your future,
your spouse or whatever.
No health insurance, like right? All this, and so many millions of people think that, right? But what happens is that it's not all or nothing. It should never be like that. There's a way to say yes to our authentic, true, original self without risking everything. And some people, I would see that they would go through the reentry work, and the changes change them so much inside. Even if their life looked exactly the same, the changes they made transformed how they felt. And actually then life started changing. The work was then started to do it on its own. It was amazing to see. So for myself, I was so afraid to say yes to the art. What would people think about me? What would they think? What am I doing art? What am I doing? So I did it. I said, I'm going to apply to this university, and I'm going to if I get in, I'm just going to take one class and not tell anyone about it. It's going to be my secret. I'm going to take it to my grave. And when I got in and I got the letter, now imagine that 5-year-old girl. Imagine that moment. And I got in as I was about to start writing the book. I was doing the clinical trials. I was working around the clock. My survival self in that moment in time said, Christina, what do you think you're doing?
What am I doing?
What do you think you're doing? Don't tell the scientists. Don't tell the students in your class. Don't tell the readers of your blog. Don't tell anyone, because they are not going to take you seriously after that. This is all my fear center work right in front of you. How are they going to see you as a professional? How the people already think that I don't even have a master's in counseling, because a lot of people go and write books about their life story. They don't realize that that's what I started as doing. So I hid it, and then it started. And the inner transformation in my feelings and how I felt about myself and my life was so impactful to me that I couldn't stop sharing it. The moment I started to share it, Robert, the impact it had on the readers, that I was choosing this for myself. You should hear the comments. Because of you, I'm going to go and do this. I'm going to go. They were all, I call it the plug-in. They were all plugging into these new lives, because it's one thing to teach something or share something, but to live it out loud and take the chance. I used to call this path for me, and I would write about it, the forbidden path. And I wouldn't say what it was, but I would call the blog the forbidden path. I had so many conversations with myself about this, knowing, I was the creator of this work. I knew what I was doing. And it's so hard.
Yeah. So really it is quite intertwined then. So you were going through and starting this program as you were writing Invisible Loss, or was it after the book was written?
My art, my MFA?
Yeah, your art.
Yeah, I started it as I was at the beginning of writing this book. At the same time.
So there must be so intertwined.
And teaching I was teaching my own classes. I was doing the clinical trials. I was writing this book, which, by the way, took 3 different drafts and 4 different editors. How do you write about something that has no language? How do you explain it? I thought it was going to be much easier. Like, oh, this is my 3rd book. Now I got it. I know what I'm doing. Forget it. I wanted to give up. I actually did try to, I'm not going to write this book. I had started changing my life, and I was going down this path that made me feel so many things, while for the majority of my day, I was working full time in this version of my life. So when you start changing, start changing just part of your hair, and it's a different color. And every time you look in the mirror, you're like, oh, I really like this part. But here's the rest of it. I don't know where this metaphor came from, but kind of, I could see it. I was changing, but then at the same time, I had to look this way for everyone else because I didn't know how this part was going to come out. So, and you're a very good listener, by the way, Robert. Better than any other listener I've ever had in any podcast.
It's kind of my job.
My God, if this is like a therapy session, right? Like you are such a good listener. What happens to you when you're sitting listening to a story here, not in your therapy sessions, because I think that's different. But what's happening to you right now in this moment?
It's totally different because in therapy, you listen with what we call like the third ear, meaning, you think about what's being said, but you're applying that to the kind of clinical goals where you think you want to sort of direct things and such. These are instances where I just get to be interested and curious. And that's for me kind of liberating to just be interested in you. And I'm always interested in trying to get to some things that maybe you don't talk about in other interview situations, because I think that's also really, really important.
Yes, I love that.
It's a good question, though.
And because I believe, and I talk about this in this book, in the work, and for me, having a conversation where we both share our thoughts as they're coming in is actually the most important part of being human. I think when we filter, we live in a very filtered cancel culture world where dare you say you're actually afraid, even if you're afraid to talk, to speak. And one of the topics that there's a theme that's being created in the last few weeks as I've been interviewing, I would say 80% of my interview hosts that have said yes are men. And I started, actually, my last 2 conversations ago, I asked this person, I said, what do you think is going on? And he turned around, and this guy's business, entrepreneurial kind of guy said, because men have a lot of invisible laws, and they're intrigued by the word, and that, who knows, that was his point of view. What do you think is happening?
What do I think is happening? My first instinct was, men have the audacity to think that they should have a platform to invite people on.
Maybe there's more men hosts, but there's it's quite fascinating to me that 80, maybe more than that percent is men, that I'm talking to are men.
Yeah. Well, I mean, let me frame it this way. Like you, with your art, it was a secret forbidden path, but I imagine creation has always been a part of how you process things, whether it's you creating or taking in art from other places, how you make sense of the world, right? And now you're doing that out front visibly. And I think, for a lot of guys, potentially, this is an acceptable way of self-reflecting versus just spending time journaling, talking with a therapist, talking with, guy friends very closely. So maybe it's just that desire in a way that's a little more sneaky still.
Wow. What a great way to put it. Wow. And I've thought how we tell men to go to support groups or go to therapy, but we don't make them feel okay that whatever they share will be accepted and not judged.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yes. It's been fascinating and interesting. But then in my support groups, we had 80% women.
Right. It's a tough nut to crack, and it's getting better, but there still is that sense of needing to protect from perception while trying to heal at the same time, which they don't coincide very well, or they don't meld very well.
Yeah. And why I hope this book and all these audiences, because the hosts are men. They're primarily a lot of male listeners, and I do hope that they find a way to give themselves permission to share with someone, or I call it the verbal cleanse, it's part of the work, and start creating environment where they're accepted to do so. And actually, I was telling someone it's much easier for me to share my traditional loss to talk about than my invisible losses. And I always feel a bit of not shame because they're harder to share. That's why I remember one of the very first interviews I did for this book. And I was so nervous. It was such a big podcast, and it was so early in this book process. Oh God, why is this now? It has to be. Put it in the end. Put it later. And I remember feeling so afraid and sharing vulnerable moments for myself. And that's when I first said, it's easier for me to talk about tragedy because it's accepted, because people have empathy, have compassion for that, than it is to talk about. And I share this story about being uninvited to this dinner party with popular authors, and I got uninvited, and it was so devastating for me, and I couldn't understand how did I feel so devastated, especially since I've gone through a lot of tragedy in my life. And that question kind of stayed, and that's how I started looking at everyone and thinking that if I could be so broken by what just happened. You see, I'm feeling it right now. I was sharing this. God knows my survivor part of brain's like, don't share. People, I wonder what people will say about this for you, So it's a hard thing to share.
Thank you for sharing it. I think that there's a parallel to physical things as well when you talk about how it's easier to share your sort of formal, visible losses. Yes. Same thing for medical health. You get a lot of understanding and sympathy and empathy when there's an obvious issue. Yes. You lost a limb, you have a bald head from cancer treatment, anything like that, versus the invisible physical ailments that many, many people live with and feel just because they're able to work, for instance, they don't feel like they have a place to talk about the ways that they suffer. And that also applies to what you were talking about with the one day at a time. Somebody with severe chronic pain, maybe depression, one day to them feels like a decade as well. So when you say one day at a time, it's the last thing they want to experience, but you just can't see it on the outside. Yeah,
and I remember reading this study. You probably have stumbled across it about what happens the hours before suicide takes place, and there's time dilation that takes place, and for the person, those thoughts, that suicide ideation, those thoughts that are taking place prior to the event feel like they're not just 5 minutes, they feel much. There's hours and hours, days, as if they feel as if they've been in that place for a long time, but it's a shorter time. So time plays tricks with you when you're in so much pain.
It's all relative. And this is one of the things I think that keep people from seeking out help sometimes in therapy, for instance, because they say, well, what do I have to complain about? I don't have this issue or that issue. So I'm glad that you're doing this pretty ambitious work of trying to broaden it. And, it seems like you've gone from, okay, the first book, maybe this is what it's like for people like me.
Yes.
Next book is this is what happens to a lot of people. And then the next book is this is everybody.
This is everybody.
We all experience
and
this.
And I'm so glad you're actually being honest and saying this is ambitious. And I remember
it is. I'm like,
yeah,
best of luck to you.
It is very ambitious. And of course I didn't realize how ambitious it was in the beginning. I was like, because for me it was every day. I was seeing it all the time. I was able to help. I mean, we had people, sharing their sexuality for the first time, like with their children. We had just incredible moments of transformation in all these years. And I was so immersed in that work and seeing what invisible loss was doing to people and how it manifested and how it looked, that, I mean, without that certainty, I would not have dared to go out into the world. And of course, the clinical trials are not about tragic death. And they came even before the proposal. I mean, it was amazing to see that that's what came through. I could not believe it. And I was like, yep, I see it. I mean, it's incredible, but very ambitious. And I love that it is like that, because I remember when Second First came out in 2013, that was ambitious too, because nobody spoke about grief that way. And I was like, they're going to just tell me to go away because I'm not a brain scientist, or this is going to be the book that's going to help so many people. And it did. And then of course, when the scientist showed up on my door, I was like, wow, what can I say?
You definitely tuned into something.
That ambition, I didn't even have that ambition. I didn't think that was ever gonna, that was not even a goal. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you don't think, oh, my work is going to be studied in trials.
We would know if you did, right? It would be inauthentic if you started with that in mind. No, that's not how this came to be.
That world did not include me in my mind, in the way I saw the work. But now, as far as I'm concerned, I hope I get to say goodbye to this work. Yeah. Dare I say that?
Isn't that kind of like grief, right? It's, you hope to find a place of being able to live within the context of these things, but not keep living within them the whole time.
Yes. And I hope that, I get to do more art than I get to write or teach. And that's a challenge for sure, because the more this work succeeds, the harder that is for me. And, that's the duality of the work itself as I see it on myself. Like, here's life for Christina, here's life and I'm very, very fulfilled doing the work, but it is art. I mean, if you notice, the work is very visual. Mm-hmm. My mind always sees things, not as visual as doing the art, but I have always had a visual brain. So as long as I can make this as fulfilling as the art, and that's what I said, I'm willing to stay. I'm willing to stay.
I'm proud of you for being true to yourself.
It's a hard thing, as you know. What would be for you something that you're not experiencing right now that, if you knew it wouldn't be a risk, you would step into it?
Probably more solo time out. Like, I watch videos of people who live out of their vans, for instance, and they get to go to some amazing places. And I have a fantasy of disappearing for a couple weeks in a really nice van and getting writing done just by myself with the elements, maybe my dog, something like that. And that's something that it feels like it would be very hard to achieve at this moment, but it's something that, if I think about it and put myself there, feels so satisfying.
Doesn't it? I can see. I mean, I saw you immediately. There's definitely woods. It's in the woods somehow where you're like, I saw woods. I didn't see the ocean.
Correct.
It's the woods, right? Yeah. For you.
Apparently I was beaming it to you, something like that. Yeah. Maybe a lake.
A lake too. Yeah. And I mean, and that's when we think that we say 2 weeks, and that's a big step out. And that's when you say, how I can't do that. I have family, I have work. I can't just leave for 2 weeks, but can you leave for 2 days?
Right.
Can you?
Yeah. One thing that I've tried to do is set my life so that I can make some better choices like that, or better, different, whatever you want to call it. So for instance, within the past few months, I negotiated some PTO for myself at my small group practice that I work within. So that sets it up so I could potentially do something like that while not having to worry about the people that I'm not assessing or doing therapy with or testing, and the drain that that's having on my bank account the whole time I'm gone.
And it feels like it's oxygen for you. Like, I think that a couple of days in that, and I'm looking over there because I can see you in there, in that element, I think for you, everything would feel incredible.
We'll have to see.
Yes, I hope so. I hope you do.
Yeah, we'll have to see. So let me pull things back a little bit so that we can start to move toward us getting back to our days. What would you, so in getting back to the invisible loss, where should people be looking to tune into that to know how that might be impacting their life, and if they maybe should be picking up your book?
Yeah. So I say there's an exercise in the beginning that tracks an early primary invisible loss and ask questions like, remember an early age that you experienced a reprimand, like the first time you got told off, and you experienced that initial shift of self-perception, that initial division of the self versus the world, when you felt that first feeling of shame and isolation. And ask yourself, where does your mind go? Is there a memory? Is there a moment when you felt like your survivor self was introduced to you for the first time, where we started pleasing other people, versus expressing your true voice?
That's some deep stuff.
And it's exactly there. And that's when we start to hide that. I call it the original self, because if we stop the evolution of that original self, because all of a sudden we're not actually growing it up, we're not evolving it. We don't know how that original self would have evolved over time, because it's stuck there. It's stuck in the past somewhere. That would have become your true self, your authentic self. So going back to that original version of you and stepping there, then you start to feel maybe more ready to try new things, more able to look for opportunities versus threats. Your worry about how does that resonate with others kind of decreases, and it's about how does it feel for me? Like when someone even goes for a date for the first time and says, let me see what I should wear, I wonder that would look good for that other person, versus how does that make me feel when I wear this? It's, if we actually pay attention to our language, our subconscious decision-making process, it's there. And in the book, I spent a lot of time, years writing this book to try to help someone without me being there, without having someone by yourself. If you have a therapist to have with you, I would say please do. If you have a good friend that you guys can go and do the work together, please do that. But to go back to that place and then attempt self-expression slowly from that place, life will translate very differently from then on. So we start out with two different exercises. One is the kind of tracking that primary moment of early age of invisible loss, and then a moment that's taking place now, that you're experiencing moments of impact triggered from that place, but ultimately it's also being experienced today. People have nausea before a meeting, heart palpitations when it's their time to share in a support group event, right? I mean, I felt that. I don't know if you have, but many people feel that, right? That
felt that right before coming into this interview.
No, and you were sharing something similar with another guest, and you had dreams about. I'm doing my research. You see, like
yes, you did very good research.
You had dreams about, and I said to myself, I like this guy immediately, because in that moment in time, you were being vulnerable with something that we both share, because this is important. This is going to be listened to by so many people. this is important that we do it right, and we do it right for them and for ourselves. And the fact that you feel the same as I do, I feel that every time I'm about to have a conversation. I think that makes us real and human, not professionals. Because sure we are professionals, but I would rather. When I was writing the book, it was very important to write it as if I was sitting. And I had to tailor that back a little bit. My editor was like, "This is too direct. Stop saying you all the time.
Too informal."
Yes, you know. So I had to pull that back, but still, that experience. I hope it's felt. I have coffee time with people in the middle of the book when we discuss about what they got from the last chapter, what they learned, and but for me, if we share our vulnerable moments inside together, then I don't know, the world is more friendly and more accepting of our imperfections, because I'm certainly not perfect at all. I mean, I was living in a waiting room bigger than my house.
Right. Yeah. Well, beautiful. Yeah. The book sounds both personal and at the same time structured, so that you do have a way to help people get to where you want them to go, but it is open and personal as well. So it seems like it strikes a balance there.
Actually, the least personal book. I took out the chapter. I always, in my books, I say I have a chapter about the story, and then everything else is the process, right? So this book barely has my story in it, and it's okay, because this is like a handbook. This is your workbook, basically. This is a lot of exercises. This is the process. This is the book that you take, and it may take you a year to go through. That's the kind of book it is. And if this is the last book I will write on grief, or any other book, then let this be the navigation, the map that anyone would need if I wasn't here.
Yeah, a bit of a legacy for you.
And I'm very careful when I say the last book, but that's the plan right now, that this would be the book that can stay without me, or can linger without me.
Your next book is going to be about your experience with art.
Of course, you're great. So of course, in my mind, creates books. I'm sure yours too, like all the time, because that's my.
It leave you alone for enough time, then you'll have an idea for something.
Let's go for a hike, and I've written another book in my head, right? And I'm going to stop it right now, And so, of course, I already wrote a book about. This is not going to happen. I can't believe I'm sharing this. See, I've not shared this with anyone publicly. Maybe one person behind in my own life, but no more than one. Something about the creative aspect of our life, and actually how paramount it is, how critical it is for us being human beings. And you see how my eyes open wide when I'm talking about that. It's almost like blood in my veins. It's incredible for people to have permission to say yes to this. It is part of life reentry. It is part of thriving, that thriver self I talk about in the book. And nothing can compare to anything, because it's amazing. Do you, apart from writing, is there anything else you do, like wood making? I don't know. Is there something that speaks to you?
Yeah. I mean, I dabble in all sorts of stuff. I have a lot of plants back here. That's a hobby that I picked up. I bake. I enjoy baking.
Wow.
There's, lots of stuff like that. I need to go back to you though, because you're doing what you're talking about right now. Yes. You stopped and you're like, I can't believe I'm saying this, and then you're saying it. So this is you doing the exact work that you're talking about.
Yes.
So
yes. Thank you.
Grateful for that opportunity.
Yes. And the art is, I mean, I will die an artist. I will die a painter. I know that. I know this. And people will say she also wrote a few books and maybe went to space, and but it will be in the parenthesis, and she wrote and she went, but she painted, and I think that's more me than anything else. And not because it's part of my original self, but because if that part of me had evolved when it was supposed to, And maybe it's supposed to now, so I shouldn't say that. But when it was there to begin with, I was literally born with this. There was no logic to it. And of course, when you look at kids, they want to do art, and people will look at me and say, "Oh, she's just a kid," but that is not true. That was not my love for art is so much larger than just me being a kid and not draw. It always has been. So yeah, I now have my art. I've done, I think, I applied to 3 group shows, and 3 group shows I've gotten into, and it's an amazing feeling to see your paintings up.
Can people find your art anywhere?
Yes, and I should put the link on my website, but just like we talked about, there is still an element of hiding that part of me, and there is one painting on my website.
Yeah, I'm aware. That's as far as I was able to find.
There is one painting, and I'm happy to send you a link to the art show that has 2 paintings, that painting and another one that's my favorite actually right now, that the Art Academy, out of thousands of paintings, they chose 30 student artists, and I was one of them, twice in a row, last year and this year. And I'm very honored and grateful, but I should ask my tech guy to put that link there, right? But that's part of it. Is so much more vulnerable for me to share my art than my writing.
Yeah.
As you're baking, maybe. I don't know how that translates to you, but because it's so intimate for me, it's such a true part of me. My writing is too,
Sure.
Especially my blog has always been, but that painting is just different.
Sure. This is you just sort of putting your soul out here and be like, here, look at this, and have opinions about it.
I know you've been seeing me as this person, but hey, I'm also this person. And to allow to be in a world where we get to be all that we are, I think that's the perfect world that I hope with this conversation, we get to create one day.
Do I get to put links to your art in the show notes?
I will.
You'll send those over to me?
I will send you, do I have, I think on the invite, let me just see. I think your email is on the invite. So what I'm going to send you I'm going to send the link to the art show, and you can, and that's the first time. And thank you for asking about it, because, we're here to talk about all the mental health stuff, but this is a big part of what I've created in my life because of the work, because of what I've been through. It took me a long time, even with tragedies. We go so much into that survival mode because we're so afraid of experiencing pain again that we lose ourselves completely. So many people have gone through so much.
Yeah. When you write a book or pitch a book, you often think about what is the transformation people are going to go through at the end of this project. And that's why I think it's important to talk about your art, because if you had this book back before, you would be at this point. This is the transformation.
Yes. And it is almost like how should I say this? But I'm such a romantic. I mean, I am such an optimist. I think I thought I was never going to experience perimenopause. I thought I'm never going to die. Like nobody's ever going to die. Like, considering all the tragedy, I'm such an optimistic person, always feeling like everything is going to be okay. And now I lost my train of thought. What was I saying, Robert? I was thinking I was going to say something, and completely.
I was talking about you doing the work and this being your transformation.
Yes, it is. Everything changes when you experience the right life reentry. When I started getting ready to do the work for this, the PR, the pitching of this book, the getting ready for the interviews, I started having panic attacks in December.
Oh, wow.
And I couldn't understand why. I actually thought I was going to have a heart attack. And I went to my general doctor and I said, what the heck is going on here? Panic attacks. Nothing's happening. I mean, I was just finishing my semester. I was presenting my thesis, proposal, these paintings that are called The Gatherings. And I was so excited about it. It was incredible. And then I was also meeting with the marketing team from my publisher as an introductory call to start things off, right? And this is, as you know, there's a long journey to even get to today, to where the book has come out, and a long journey after. But I started experiencing daily severe panic attacks. We're talking about ready to collapse, throw up, and I couldn't control them. And I said to myself, I have to go through another reentry. Something is going on. And what I realized was that I had created this new life, and I was so afraid of losing the time to paint and to say yes to my art. I had worked so hard to get there that I panicked because I was about to step into this again.
Right. What happens if this succeeds? What happens if you end up on this show or that show and the book gets picked up, and then you have to, keep rolling with it?
I was afraid of my own success. This is real. This is, people say, oh, people, you're afraid of success. I'm like, I know, Robert, I'm going to say something. You're going to say, no, that's not true. I am an introvert. Right? It doesn't sound true, right?
I could see it. It's fine.
I know you are too, but the more traditional introvert, I think.
Sure.
But I can be alone for days. I recharge alone. I like alone time. I love alone time. Right. It's so important to me. When I step out in front of the computer, out of my house, that's a big output for me. That's huge. So being an artist also puts you into that introverted space where you don't talk to anyone for hours while you're painting.
Art versus book tour, two very, very different things.
So I had to find a way to make these conversations right for me, and why I'm showing up in this kind of crazy, authentic way, because I said to myself, this is the only way I'm going to do any of the interviews. I'm going to be 100% me. I'm going to sound animated. I'm going to express my feelings and how I'm feeling. I'm going to make it fun, and I'm going to make it right for me. And then if that's true, then it's going to be right for everyone else. Otherwise, I cannot do it. I would have this panic. They stopped. The last one happened in January. I have not experienced another one.
I'm not surprised.
Why? Tell me how did it go away like this?
For me, I think that we may have different language for the same thing. I typically will say things like authentic or authenticity. And I've seen many times where there's this surface level issue, be that depression, sometimes suicidality, panic attacks, what have you. And really the issue is someone's not allowed to be themselves, or they're not allowing themselves to be themselves. And once you crack through that and you can show up more authentically, there may be issues that come with that, but that thing that was protecting you goes away.
I call that phase the divergent phase, because when you start to show up as yourself, others around you may struggle with that. And that's when you have to keep pushing through. And for me, coming into these conversations as I would be if there was no listeners and it's just you and I sitting at a coffee shop, is risky for sure, because there is a version of me that I can sit here and have a very professional, conversation that would protect me and would showcase the work as this, but that is not what I'm interested in at all.
I know that the listeners of my show will really appreciate that.
and you're the right.
Thanks for going
and
there.
Your titles of your work and your book is amazing. And I'm like, he's the right host for me, for sure. And I've had some great, incredible, other hosts as well. But when I saw your, description of the work that you do, by the way, great statement of describing how you see it and what people get out of being a part of your universe. And I hope these conversations bring to you incredible clients and incredible, your practice. I bet you have a waiting list. I
don't really see all that many people for therapy. I have a few, and this is another outlet for, again, broadening things, just like you're trying to do at this stage in your life.
Yes. What do you do? What's your full-time job?
Oh my God. I'm a neuropsychologist. So I actually test people for cognitive issues, dementia, strokes, brain injuries, things like that. I have a private therapy practice with a handful of people that I see for therapy. And then I do books and podcasts and things of that sort.
Well, you're very creative then. I think that, yes, there is a part that is the professional that does all the testing and does the therapy sessions, but then there's this that is more creative, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
Absolutely.
Amazing.
Where can people find your newest book? Is this on Amazon? What's the best place for them to be picking it up?
Unfortunately, it is Amazon. You can find it at Barnes & Noble. You can find it at the local bookshop.
Okay.
If they don't have it, you can order it. You can tell them, like, please support your local bookstores. But for ease, it is go on Amazon, put Invisible Loss, and it will pop up immediately. My website is just my name, ChristinaRasmussen.com. I had to buy some guy who bought my name, by the way.
Oh, was it a lot?
It was thousands of dollars.
Oh, yeah, no. God, that sucks.
Like $3,000. And I think that's a lot of money to get your name back from a guy that did not have this name.
There's some deep stuff there. Yes. Yeah, there's something very wrong about that.
So that's ChristinaRasmussen.com. All the books are there. Okay. I also have this digital Invisible Loss library that we don't keep your emails. This is anonymous. I have my tech guy who approves so it's not, trash or anything like that, approves the people can share their Invisible Loss anonymously. And my goal for that is for a digital library to exist of thousands of invisible losses. And so when people go there, they read someone else's, they feel validated for their own story.
Okay. Is that on your website, or where do people find that? So
that invisiblelosses.com. And I think we have a link to it on our website. Again, I don't want your emails. I just want people to just go there. That's something that can live the experiences. To read. So invisiblelosses.com. The book is invisiblelosbook.com. My website is ChristinaRasmussen.com. And I hope the book finds its way to you, and I hope you take time to read it and do the homework and be open to the surprises and discoveries that it will bring to you.
Beautiful. Before I let you go, I was wondering if there is a piece of art that you would like to direct people to, that you feel like everybody should see.
My own art, or
somebody else's, something that you really appreciate, that you feel like gets it, something that you would like to direct.
Yeah, there is a painting called Christina's World, and let me just look very quickly, remind myself of the artist. It has nothing to do with my name. And yeah, I know, right? Painting. Yeah, here it is. So
that would be funny if it was. So you're like, yeah, you can check out my painting, Christina's World, which is all about me.
So the painter's name, he has passed, Andrew Wyeth, and the painting is called Christina's World, and it is a woman that I think she had some kind of disability that he would see from his window, and she's on all fours trying to go up this hill towards the house. And I feel, first of all, it's an incredibly skilled painting. She was a very well-known artist. But as a metaphor, I feel like we're all on our fours in our life trying to make our way to the top of our own hill or mountain. And I love this painting, not only for the way that he painted it, but for what it means to me. And of course, it had my name on it, and that was, interesting to me, but I hope everyone takes the metaphor that it has. So it's called Christina's World, and nobody has ever asked me, and it was painted in 1948, so quite a long time ago now. Wow. Nobody has ever asked me this before, so thank you for that question very much, Robert.
It's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you very, very much.
I loved every second of our conversation, Robert. Thank you for your listening.